I guess I will go back to 1325. And a new miracle happened. Out of nowhere, certain men came, and each of them said, like Louis XIV, L'état de moi, c'est moi. L'état, c'est moi. Not bad. They are the new leaders. The state has proved its personal reality by incarnating itself in men that came from Galilee, inconspicuous nobodies previously, but equipped with the great spirit voice that cowed the people into soundless obedience. They are like Roman Caesars, usurpers of empires and kingdoms, and like those incarnations of a previously invisible deity, devoutly invoked and believed in by everyone. They are the state that has superseded the medieval theocracy. This process of incarnation is particularly drastic in Hitler's case. Hitler himself, as an ordinary person, is a shy and friendly man with an artistic taste and gift. As a mere man, he is inoffensive and modest and has nice eyes. But he comes from Braunau, a little town that has already produced two famous mediums, the Schneider brothers. Harry Price has written a book about one of them. Hitler is presumably the third and most efficient medium from Braunau. When the state spirit speaks through him, he sends forth a voice of thunder, and his word is so powerful that it sweeps together crowds of millions like fallen autumn leaves. There is obviously no power left in the world, and particularly no state-loving ism, which is capable of resisting this incredible force. Of course, you will say, as everybody does, one must be a German to understand such miracles. One must be a German to understand such miracles. Yes, this is just as true as that you must be an Italian to understand the mythology of the fascio, or a Russian to appreciate the charms of Stalin's paternal regime. Of course, you can't understand those funny foreigners, Sir Oswald Mosley and Colonel de la Roque, being still babes in arms. But if you carefully study what President Roosevelt is up to and what the famous NRA meant to the world of American commerce and industry, then you get a certain idea of how near the great state in America is. Then you get a certain idea of how the great state in America is becoming Roosevelt's incarnation. Now, then he says, Roosevelt is the stuff all right, only the circumstances are not bad enough. And there are two footnotes, which I obfuscated in the previous reading, so I'm going to read now. The footnotes are, and this is a reference to Sir Oswald Mosley. It says, Mosley founded the British Union of Fascists, the Black Shirts, in 1932, and Colonel François de la Roque was leader of the French reactionary group Croix de Feu. My French is terrible. Okay, and then in the reference to NRA, it's not the National Rifle Association, it's the National Recovery Administration, established to administer the National Industrial Recovery Act, 13 June 1933, recognizing a, quote, national emergency and vesting in the President, F.D. Roosevelt, authority to approve codes of fair competition for various trades and industries, regulate wages, hours of labor, etc. Just a minute, because I've restarted the computer, I have to get take care of a couple of housekeeping items on my computer. This will just take a moment. Hopefully this will just take a moment. Okay. All right. So that time you got the footnotes. 2. Great Britain seems to be pretty conservative, yet you have a taxation which makes great estates uninhabitable. That is exactly how things began in Italy. You have devalued your money. This is the second step. You could not stop the boastful march of Roman legions through the bottleneck of Suez, and Sir Samuel meekly and wisely took all the air out of the magnificent gestures of a proud British fleet adorning the entrances to Italy's triumph. He's obviously talking about Italy triumphing over Ethiopia. This was the third step. England comes perhaps so late into Space Battleship, thank you. A modem needs to be replaced every few years. No one thinks about that. Vendors don't give them software fixes and security patches. Yeah, that might be my problem. I definitely need a new computer. Anyway, carrying on. This was the third step. England comes perhaps so late into the paradise of a new age that she arrives there with many old world values well preserved by sheer lack of interest. Being Swiss, I heartily sympathize with this attitude. Knowing of nothing that would be better, we hang on to the rear of events and muddle along as we have been used to do for 600 years. We can't imagine our dictator yet, but already an unfortunate majority believes in the mighty ghost to whom we have sacrificed all our railways and the gold standard on top of that. Paragraph 1328. The incarnation of the state ghost is no mean affair. It competes with famous historical parallels. It even challenges them. Just as Christianity had a cross to symbolize its essential teaching, so Hitler has a swastika, a symbol of old and widespread, a symbol as old and widespread as the cross. And just as it was a star over Bethlehem that announced the incarnation of God, so Russia has a red star, and instead of the dove and the lamb, a hammer and sickle. Instead of the sacred body, a place of pilgrimage with the mummy of the first witness. He's referring to Lenin's tomb. Even as Christianity challenged the Roman Imperium, enthroned ambitious Roman bishops are Pontifexes Romani, and perpetuated the great empire in the theocracy of the Church and the Holy Roman Empire. So the Duce, the Duce, I guess it's the Duce. So the Duce has produced one more all the same. So the Duce has produced once more all the stage scenery of the Imperium, which will soon reach from Ethiopia to the Pillars of Hercules as of old. Again, it is Germany that gives us some notion of the underlying archetypal symbolism brought up by the eruption of the collective unconscious. Hitler's picture has been erected upon Christian altars. There are people who confess on their tombstones that they died in peace since their eyes had beheld not the Lord, but the Führer. The onslaught on Christianity is obvious. It would not even need corroboration through a neo-pagan movement incorporating 3 million people. This movement can only be compared with the archetypal material exhibited by a case of paranoid schizophrenia. You find in Neopaganism the most beautiful Wotanistic symbolism, Indo-Germanic speculation, and so on. In North Germany, there is a sect that worships Christ in the form of a rider on a white horse. It does not go as far as collective hallucinations, though the waves of enthusiasm and even ecstasy are running high. Nations in a condition of collective misery behave like neurotic and even psychotic individuals. First, they get dissociated or disintegrated, then they pass into a state of confusion and disorientation. As it is not a question of psychotic disintegration in an individual case, the confusion affects mainly the conscious and subconscious layers, but does not touch the fundamental instinctual nature of the mind, the collective unconscious. On the contrary, the confusion in the top layers produces a compensatory reaction in the collective unconscious, consisting of a peculiar personality surrogate, an archaic personality equipped with superior instinctive forces. This new constellation is at first completely unconscious, but as it is activated, it becomes perceptible in the form of a projection. It is usually the doctor treating a patient who unwittingly assumes the role of the projected figure. The mechanism of this projection is the transference. By transference, the doctor appears in the guise of the father, for instance, as that personality who symbolizes superior power and intelligence, a guarantee of security and protection against overwhelming dangers. So long as the disintegration has not reached the deeper layers, the transference will not produce more than a projection of the father image. But once the confusion has stirred up these unknown depths, the projection becomes more collective and takes on mythological forms. In this case, the doctor appears as a sort of sorcerer or savior. With actively religious persons, the doctor would be superseded by an activated image of Christ or by that of an indivisible divine presence. Mystical literature abounds in descriptions of such experiences. Paragraph 1331. You also find detailed records in William James' Varieties of Religious Experience. But if you observe the dreams of such patients, you find peculiar symbolic images, often long before the patients themselves become conscious of any so-called mystical experiences. These images always show a specific pattern. They are circular or square, or like a cross or a star, and are composites of such elements. The technical term I use for such figures is Mandala, the Sanskrit word for circle. The corresponding medieval Latin term is the circulus quadratus, or rosa. In Hindu literature, you also find the terms Padma, lotus, and chakra, meaning the flower-like centers, or different localizations of consciousness. Paragraph 1332. See, before I go to that, let me just check. Jim Gunzel says, Jung's description of democracy, I think in democracy the state or government is seductive or attractive because it accepts all the power citizens give it or require of it, and thus relieves citizens from thinking, making decisions, and taking responsibility for anything. That seems the definition of the far right and the far left collectives. Duties seem to me to be activities that keep a person mentally and physically occupied so that he will have something non-challenging to say during social gatherings. Yes, I agree with you, Jim. I think that the interesting thing about the United States is that we have such vigorous debate here, and that's unlike the countries of Europe where people have sort of a common heritage. Here we have a very diverse population, and so we're in the habit of taking every good idea from every group and vigorously debating every bad idea out of the system. That system is obviously being tested in 2018, but it is, in my view, the process by which the United States has become the strongest country in the world, at least at this point in time. And time will tell. Ask me in a year if we're still strong, but I think that it is our debate that makes us strong, and it's our debate that allows us to avoid the kinds of problems, or some of the problems, that Dr. Jung is talking about here. Okay, so paragraph 1332. Because of its circular form, the mandala expresses roundness, that is, completeness or integration. In Tantrism and Lamaism, it is used as an instrument of concentration and as a means of uniting the individual consciousness, the human ego personality, with the superior divine personality of the non-ego, i.e., of the unconscious. Mandalas often have the character of rotating figures. One such figure is the swastika. We may therefore interpret it as a projection of an unconscious collective attempt at the formation of a compensatory, unified personality. This unconscious attempt plays a great role in the general personification of the state. It gives it its ghost-like quality and bestows upon it the faculty of incarnating itself in a human personality. The almost personal authority and apparent efficiency of the state are, in a sense, nothing else than the unconscious constellation of a superior instinctual personality which compensates the obvious inefficiency of the conscious ego personality. Paragraph 1333. Well, let's see. Space Battleship says, it's your freedom you don't realize you have that. It's the freedoms you don't realize you have that makes the U.S.A. what it is. The debates are equally crap to Europe. Your forefathers were very clever in restricting government. Yes, yes, they were. But I'm not saying that the debates aren't crap, Space Battleship. I do acknowledge that they're pretty bad. But on the other hand, they are the process that tempers the steel of the country. And what we haven't understood as humans, by and large, is that countries that have dictatorships or autocratic rulers tend to fall behind. And ultimately, the rulers get overthrown. It may take hundreds of years. In the old days, it did. These days, with the internet and people thinking faster and getting together faster, the time frame might be quite shortened. But what we can see is that in countries like Turkey or Egypt or even Japan, where there's a very rigid system, the countries start to fall behind, whereas the United States and Great Britain, Germany, post-war, and so on, where there has been vigorous debate, the countries advance faster. And I believe that that's a phenomenon, a political phenomenon that's unconscious, but nonetheless at work. At least that's my view. Paragraph 1333. When Nietzsche wrote his prophetic wait a minute. I might have missed one paragraph, so let me read it again. The almost personal authority and apparent efficiency of the state are, in a sense, nothing else than the unconscious constellation of a superior instinctual personality which compensates the obvious inefficiency of the conscious ego personality. I guess I did read that, but anyway, now you've got it twice. Paragraph 1333. When Nietzsche wrote his prophetic masterpiece, Thus Spake Zarathustra, he certainly had not the faintest notion that the Superman he had created out of his personal misery and inefficiency would become a prophetic anticipation of a Führer or a Duce. Hitler and Mussolini are more or less ordinary human beings, but ones who, curiously enough, assume that they themselves know what to do in a situation which practically nobody understands. They seem to have the superhuman courage or the equally superhuman recklessness to shoulder a responsibility which apparently nobody else is willing or able to carry. Only a Superman could be entrusted with faculties that are equal to the difficulties of the actual situation. But we know that mystical experience as well as identification with an archetypal figure lend almost superhuman force to the ordinary man. Not in vain do the Germans call their Führer our Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc. He is very much the character that is open to unconscious influences. I am told that Hitler locked himself in his room for 3 days and nights when his whole staff beseeched him not to leave the League of Nations. When he appeared again, he said without explanation, "Gentlemen, Germany must leave the League." This story sounds as if German politics were not made but revealed. Hitler's unconscious seems to be female. Mussolini's Latin and very masculine temperament does not allow a comparison with Hitler. As an Italian, he is imbued with Roman history, and indeed, in every gesture he betrays his identity with Caesar. It is most characteristic what rumor has to say about him. I am told, I don't know whether there is any truth in it or not, that not very long ago he appeared at a reception in the Roman toga and the golden laurel wreath of the Caesar, creating a panic that could only be hushed up by the most drastic measures. Even if this is a mere legend, it shows beautifully how rumors interpret Even if this is mere legend, it shows beautifully how rumor interprets the Duce's role. Gossip is surely a bad thing, but I confess I always find it interesting because it is often the only means of getting information about a public figure. Gossip does not need to be true in order to be of value. Then, if it gives an entirely twisted picture of a man, it clearly shows the way in which his persona, that is, his public appearance, functions. The persona is never the true character. It is a composite of the individual's behavior and of the role attributed to him by the public. Most of the biography of a public figure consists of the persona's history, and often of very little individual truth. Well, this is the penalty the man in the limelight has to pay. Getting close. A few more pages. It seems as if in nearly all the countries of Europe, the gulf between the right and the left were widening, insofar as these countries are not already fascist. Paragraph 1335. It is so in Spain, and it soon might be obvious in France. Since socialism and communism merely enhance the attributes of democracy, i.e., of a constitution where there is a ruler without subjects and subjects without a ruler, they only serve to hollow out the meaning of parliament, of government, of money, and of the so-called rights of the free citizen. The only possible synthesis seems to be the eventual incarnation of the state ghost in a Superman with all his mythological paraphernalia. Recently, Ramsay MacDonald made a very clear statement. Speaking of the Labour Party, he literally said, "Its members are a flock without a shepherd, and with a plethora of sheepdogs in a disagreement with one another about the fold in which the flock should be penned. Is it not time for Labour policy to be realistic? By its fumbling with the cardinal issues of defense and peace, it is casting doubt on the competence of democracy and playing straight into the hands of fascism." The problems of modern life are too urgent to remain the playthings of short-sighted partisans. Paragraph 1336. It is doubtful whether the European nations would remain for any length of time in the chaotic disorder of the childish communistic doctrine. They rather revert to types, to a state of enforced order which is nothing else than dictatorship and tyrannical oligarchy. At least this form has come to light even in the sluggish Russia, where 170 million people are kept in order by a few million members of the Communist Party. In Italy, it is the Fascio, and in Germany, the SS is fast on the way of becoming something like a religious order of knights that is going to rule a colony of 60 million natives. In the history of the world, there has never been a case where order was established with sweet reasonableness in a chaos. Chaos yields only enforced order. Paragraph 1337. In the dictator and his oligarchical hierarchy, the state ghost appears in the flesh. Yet such statesmen are human beings who assumed power over their fellow beings, and instantly the latter feel suppressed, which they did not feel as long as they were called democracies or democrats, Of course, this state slavery is just as bad as before, but now they remember they might have to say something political and are told to shut up. Then they feel as if something dreadful had happened to them. They don't realize that whatever they talked about in the democracy, they don't realize that whatever they talked about in the democracy was just as futile as anything they might talk about now. It is true that Democrats talk and socialists talk more, and communists beat them all at talk. It is just that sort of thing that has led them to disintegration. That's why in a condition of enforced order, talk becomes abruptly to an end. Disorder is destructive. Order is always a cage. Paragraph 1338. Freedom is the prerogative of a minority, and it is always based on the disadvantage of others. Switzerland, the oldest democracy in the world, calls herself a free country because no foreigner ever enjoyed a liberty to her disadvantage until America and Great Britain went off the gold standard. Since then, we have felt like victims. Now we play the same trick on the other countries that hold Swiss bonds. Mind you, Switzerland is the third biggest banker in Europe, and we probably feel better for it. But are we really free? We are weak and unimportant, and we try to be so. Our style of life is narrow, and our outlook hampered not only by ordinary hills, but by veritable mountains of prejudice against anything and everybody that exceeds our size. We are locked in the cage of order, and we enjoy just enough air to be We are locked in the cage of order, and we enjoy just enough air not to suffocate. We have one virtue yet. We are modest, and our ambitions are small. That is why we can stick to order and why we don't believe much in talk. But our freedom is exceedingly limited. Fortunately enough, it may save us from a dictator. Paragraph 1339. In continental Europe today, I am afraid it is hardly a question of whether we are going to enjoy more freedom or less. As a matter of fact, things have gone so far that soon even the problem of freedom will be obsolete. The question is rather that of to be or not to be. The dilemma is now between chaos and enforced order. Will there be civil war or not? That is what we anxiously ask the dark fates of Europe. I would like to quote here Miguel de Unamuno, one of those Spanish liberals who undermined the traditional order in the hope of creating greater freedom. Here is his most recent confession. Quote, "Times have changed. It is not any more a question of liberalism and democracy, republic or monarchy, socialism or capitalism. It is a question of civilization and barbarity. Civilization is now represented in Spain by General Franco's army." Paragraph 1340. Compulsory order seems to be preferable to the terrors of chaos, at all events the lesser of two great evils. Orders, I am afraid, have to be heard in silence. Paragraph 1341. But there is a majority of people to whom it seems the most serious matter in the world when they can't talk anymore. This appears to be the reason why even the most dictatorships This appears to be the reason why most dictatorships are eventually talked out of existence, and why the senseless and lamentable gamble of politics is meandering its way through history, a sad comedy to the thinking mind and to the feeling heart. Paragraph 1342. If we are stumbling into an era of dictators, Caesars, and incarnated states, we have accomplished a cycle of 2,000 years, and the serpent has again met with its own tail. This is a reference to the Ouroboros, of course. Then our era will be a near replica of the first centuries AD, when Caesar was the state and a god, and divine sacrifices were made to Caesar while the temples of the gods crumbled away. You know that thousands in those days turned their eyes away from the visible world, filled with horror and disgust, and adopted a philosophy which healed their souls. Since history repeats itself, and the spiral of evolution seemingly returns to the point where it took off, there is a possibility that mankind is approaching an epoch when enough will be said about things which are never what we wish them to be, and when the question will be raised why we were ever interested in a bad comedy. And that is the end. So that was quite cheery. I'll take any comments or questions for a few minutes here, and then I'm going to call this live stream to an end. But I will give you a moment to gather your thoughts and put them onto the chat if you have any. Okay, so I was reading from Psychology and National Problems, which is an essay found in volume 18 of the Collected Works of C.G. Jung. You can find the full citation in the dialogue underneath this video. And if you don't have access to the essay, you can write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will make you a member of our Dropbox so that you can receive that from me. And so, other than that, I'm going to go back to the news of the day, which is Hurricane Florence. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, I guess not, so I am going to terminate this live stream now. Thanks for joining me today, and I'm sorry that it had to go into 2 parts.